Shalom Chaverim. Today Parashat Tetzeh, the Torah portion of Tetzeh, and we're going to do it together with our friend Carl Jung, and more about Jung in a little bit. But first, a story. Once upon a time, in Krakow, that's Krakow, Poland, lived a man, a very, very poor man, named Reb Isaac ben Yakil. And Reb Isaac ben Yakil was so poor, he didn't know where his next meal was going to come from. And one night, he dreamt a really weird dream. And in his dream, it was told to him that there was a treasure buried under a bridge in Prague. Well, okay. Woke up the next morning, so there's a treasure under a bridge in Prague. It's a dream. Prague is very, very far. What can I do? But then the next night, the dream came back and then kept reoccurring every night and night again. So Reb Isaac ben Yakil said, okay, that's maybe a sign that I need to actually go to Prague and see if there's a treasure under the bridge. So he embarked on this journey that was very, very difficult. But finally, he made it to Prague. By the way, I think that that bridge that they're talking about is Karlov Most, is the Karl's Bridge, the famous Karl Bridge in Prague. But he comes to Prague, and unfortunately, the bridge is patrolled by many officers. So he said, okay, maybe I'll come back later when the officers are not there. He tries different hours of the day, but there's constantly officers patrolling that bridge in Prague. Eventually, the officers start noticing that there's this really poor-looking man kind of loitering there, and he gets arrested. And he's being interrogated, and the interrogating officer asks him, so what do you want? What are you doing here? So Reb Isaac ben Yakil says, I've been having these dreams that there's a treasure buried under the bridge. So I came to see if that was true. And the officer starts laughing. And he said, you're crazy. It's like, I've been having dreams that there's a treasure that's buried in Krakow somewhere under an oven of a man named Isaac something. And how many Isaacs must live in Krakow? So do you think I will go all the way there just to find that treasure? That moment, Reb Isaac ben Yakil understands that his dream told him to go all the way to Prague just to find out that the treasure is buried in his house under the oven. So he goes back home, and indeed, there's a great treasure under his oven, and he becomes instantly a really, really rich man. And he uses some of his money to build a synagogue in Krakow. By the way, this synagogue, legends say, still stands in Krakow. It's actually called the Isaac Shul, or Isaac ben Yakil Shul. You can look it up. And it's one of the only synagogues to survive the Holocaust in Krakow. So that's the story. Now, the origins of the story are actually in the Jerusalem Talmud in a different version, but the story was made famous by Rabbi Simcha Bonim of Pshische, who's basically a rabbi that lived between 1765 to 1827. And Rabbi Simcha Bonim made it famous because it was said that he used to tell this story to his students every time they came to meet him for the first time. And of course, what Simcha Bonim wanted to convey to his students is that sometimes you need to go really, really far, sometimes even to the edge of the world, only to find out that what you are looking for is in fact in your possession. And that was a lesson that Bonim wanted to convey right off the bat for his students. Now, I told you this story because of the first verse in our portion, Tetzeh, is actually Tetzeh, yeah? Tetzeh למלחמה על אויביך ונתנו אדוני אלוהיך בידיך ושבית שביו. Okay, which means when you go to war, okay, when you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take captives. So the surface level read interpretation of this is basically, okay, here's a portion that's going to talk about the conduct in war, right? And what you can and cannot do when you embark, when you go to war. But of course, some of you can guess that the Hasidic interpretations of it, the typical Hasidic interpretations of it, is that we're talking about an inner war here, and it's a war that we embark on against our evil inclinations and our own enemies. Now, I wanted to bring one interpretation that I really liked from Sforno, and I'm starting to bring Sforno a lot here. It's becoming one of my favorite commentators. And he writes about the opening two words, ki tetzeh, which means, and you shall go out, or and you shall embark. So Sforno says, ki tetzeh, you shall go out, means beyond the boundaries of your land. And the reason why I love it so much, beyond the boundaries of your land, is because if you take Sforno's idea and apply it to the Hasidic interpretation, it could mean you should go out beyond the boundaries of yourself. And this is where Carl Jung comes in. Okay, so Carl Jung, born in 1875, died in 1961. He was a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, and is perhaps one of the most famous and known psychologists to ever live. Maybe only second to Sigmund Freud, who was his teacher and colleague until they broke apart. Jung wrote over 20 books about many topics, but today I really want to talk about the topic that is relevant to our core idea, and it is his idea of individuation. Now, in order to understand the process of individuation as Jung formed it, I really want to give a little bit of an introduction of how Carl Jung sees our psyche. So our psyche, according to Jung, is not accessible to us. In its core lies what Jung would call the self. And the self is who we truly are. And it's not accessible to us because the self is made of both the conscience and the unconscious. Now, the conscience is made of two parts, which is the ego and the persona. The ego is basically our sense of separation from others, basically our sense of individuality. And the persona is how we act and behave, and persona comes from the Greek word for mask, right? The mask that we wear, how do we present ourselves to basically fit in society? That's the persona. So the ego and the persona is in our conscience. The unconscious is made of what Jung calls our shadow. And our shadow is basically our dark selves. It's basically the things in us that we do not want to confront, that we would like to suppress. And it's also made of the anima and the animus. The anima is basically the feminine traits that exist in every male, and the animus is the masculine traits that exist in every woman. Okay, so that's just an introduction to how Jung views our psyche. But what is the process of individuation? The process of individuation is the journey that we all take throughout a lifetime to try and access our true selves. And the way to do it is to confront our shadow. Now you see where this is going with the Parshah, with us embarking on a journey to confront that dark side, that enemy. Now, I want to read a little bit from Jung himself in his own words. So he writes, and look how beautifully it also gels with our Parashah. He writes, individuation is an exceedingly difficult task. It always involves a conflict of duties whose solution requires us to understand that our counter will is also an aspect of God's will. So this is very, very powerful, is to basically embrace our dark side as also something that comes from God, that basically something that we shouldn't reject. Now, there is another level to what Jung is saying, and I will try to convey it without you running away because it is a little bit out there. So Jung was an explorer of esotericism. So basically, the occult, if you would like to call it this way. And he believed and researched what is known as the Platonic year. Okay, so what is the Platonic year? The Platonic year is a period of about roughly 26,000 years, that in which the Earth is basically making a full a tour around all the different constellations that we can see from Earth. Now, those 26,000 years are divided into 12 months, and each Platonic month is roughly 2,165 years. Okay? Now, in a given Platonic month, we see a certain constellation in a certain way. Those months are also known as ages or as eons. And what Jung wrote about, which is really, really interesting, is about something that is called our collective unconscious. And the collective unconsciousness is really something that's very profound, because what he means to say that when we access ourselves on the deepest level, everything that all of our emotion, our behavior, everything that stems from it, the core of it is something that we all share. And that's why he calls it the collective unconsciousness. And that has something to do with the Platonic year. So Jung explains that we are now transitioning from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. Now, the age of Pisces started around 7 BCE. And if you think about it, 2,165 years. So we are now in a point where we're beginning to transition to the age of Aquarius. Now, what really defined the age of Pisces is that this last 2,000 years, if you want to think about it this way, was an age of opposites. If you think about the symbol of the Pisces is fish going in, basically facing the opposite directions. It's the edge of opposites, of good and evil, of darkness and light. And everything in our history and our philosophy is also a representation of that push and pull between good and evil, if you will. And what Jung suggests that our task as we approach to the age of Aquarius is to try and bring those opposites to be one. And the only way to do it is to not look at the evil as evil anymore, but accept it as good. Now, I know that this is a very, very hard concept to swallow, but basically embracing our dark side is what would transition us to the next age of divinity, of history, of culture, or as he would frame it, archetypes. So I know this was a lot, but to conclude, I think that what our Parshah, or what Simcha Bonim, or what Jung are telling us is all the same. That if we want to access ourselves, we need to look into what we don't want to confront and try to embrace it. And sometimes it requires to go to a very long journey, like in Bonim's story. But if we take that journey and go really far, even though it's scary, we may find that treasure that was all along within us. Shabbat Shalom.